Hey there all, welcome to a Wolfpack Wargaming video. I wanted to give you an update on the Kingdom Death Monster board game. So I was a Kickstarter backer to the 1.5 Kingdom Death fundraiser and received my core set a while back ago, and I did an unboxing video on this channel, and since that time have been able to play a few games of it, and as you can see, put the figures together, and wanted to give sort of an update of my experience of it, as well as maybe some recommendations for those who might be getting into the game. So first off, I just want to say I've read through the rules and played the game about 10 hours or so now, and gotta say I absolutely love it. I'm really impressed with the game. I watched videos before I backed it online, and just super glad that I did. The game is remarkably fun, probably one of the funnest board games I've ever played, quite honestly, and is a game that, while has a lot of depth, I think is easy enough that others who are not as into this kind of gaming, they can get into it and feel like they know what they're doing, and they're not quite in over their heads. In fact, I actually had a buddy come play it with me, and he is not into wargaming or miniature gaming, and we tried out the first little mission, and next thing you know, we were 8 hours into it and had played through about 3 or 4 lantern years. Now, I have to say the game is pretty brutal. It is competitive and is a challenge, and I quite honestly love that strategy aspect of it, and look forward to learning the ins and outs of the game and the best way to approach different monsters that you hunt. I think one of the funnier moments when we were playing is as soon as the screaming antelope became available to hunt, we decided to track it down and go up against it. In our first attempt at it, we quickly realized that our characters were not experienced enough to handle his damage output, and he immediately destroyed us. So the game's a lot of fun, has a lot of twists and turns, and a lot of story elements that really paint a picture of what's going on and just immerse you in the game. So I can't speak highly enough about it. I love the game. It's a blast. And hopefully in the future I'll be doing some videos of actual gameplay. I also wanted to just give a shout out to the Kingdom Death team and their responsiveness, their support, because I actually found out that I was missing a component of the game, very small card. I put in a ticket to their customer support, and sure enough, within a couple of days they had responded, and then within like a week and a half they had sent me the card that I was missing. So thanks to them and their quickness for follow through. So I just wanted to make some other comments about the game, as I know there's a lot of people probably getting into this game that might not be into miniatures themselves, and of course one of the draws to this game is just how detailed and amazing these models are, and they were a lot of fun to put together. And you can kind of see here, I'll take some pictures as well, but the models are great. They're going to be a lot of fun to paint, and I'll talk about how I'm going to do that in a little bit. But I did want to give some tips to those that might be getting into this game because they've heard so much about it and it's so popular, but they may not be as experienced with actually putting models together. And I will say that these are not necessarily beginner models to put together. They're definitely a little bit more advanced, the bigger ones in particular that have more details and components. So I wanted to give some tips just right off. If you did find yourself getting into this game and you opened up the box of miniatures and saw all those sprues of the guys that you have to put together and maybe felt a little overwhelmed about, how do you take this task on? Because one of the things you'll also find is that this game does not come with a instruction booklet for how to put these models together. There is an online link that takes you to the website for Kingdom Death where they do have some instructions for, I think, some of the models. I'm not even entirely sure that they have instructions for all of them. I myself used, if you Google Kingdom Death model builds, you'll find that others have also placed instructions online that are very detailed, and I thank those people that have done that. That definitely helped me when putting these models together. So let me just show you a sprue here to kind of give you an idea of what sort of details you're going to be seeing when putting these models together. Now, of course, this is a sprue that's already been cut out, but you can see that the components are as detailed as putting the hair together. So not just putting hair on the head, but hair might have multiple pieces that you have to glue together. One of the tricky things that I also found was that the arms, all of the arms for these models were essentially 2 pieces, meaning that half the forearm was one of these smaller pieces, and it was a bit of a challenge to figure out which forearm matched with which arm, because they're not always labeled, so it was kind of trial and error sometimes. So I definitely recommend that you check out online websites that go into detail about how to put these models together, which will give you some kind of guide to help you know what you're doing. And there's a lot of customizability. Essentially, each of the sprues is a different armor set for whether or not you killed the lion or the screaming antelope. And so you can put gear on each of these characters that represent the armor that you're building throughout the game. But you can really mix and match these too. It's so customizable that you can actually build characters that incorporate different gear from different hunts. One of the other recommendations I'd make though is that, again, if you're kind of getting into this for the first time, or even if you are a hobbyer and have put together miniatures in the past, you'll see that these are a lot of models that just come with the core set of this game, and it can be kind of overwhelming to even start on the task because there's just so much to do, and it is kind of time consuming. So one of the things that I do to help sort of manage the process and to help me get through putting all these models together is that I take my time. I don't try to do it all in like a weekend or a long sitting. Instead, I might break it up over the course of a few weeks, and in this case, one of the things I would do is maybe one night I'd build one of the monsters, and then another night I might build two of the characters, the survivors, and I would just do that, each night, doing maybe about an hour of hobbying, and next thing you know, over a few weeks it was all done, and it wasn't too daunting of a task. Now, if you are getting into miniatures for the first time, and this is the first time you're putting some miniatures together, of course, you're going to need some super glue, but let me also just kind of point out some other items that you might need to build models of this detail. So, of course, one of the first things that you want to get is some clippers like this, some hobby clippers, which are your best friend to clip off the sprue. It's going to help you clip all the small little pieces off of the sprues and allow you to do it in such a way that it cuts it to a pretty fine point so that you don't have just little lumps of plastic sticking off of your model. Next thing you're going to want to probably get is some tweezers. These are some metal tweezers, and tweezers are really helpful in that you have these small little pieces, particularly arms and heads and things like that, and you're wanting to stick them to the body, and if you're like me, half the time you're sticking them to your finger or you're holding it in place, and the next thing you know, you release your finger off of the model and the piece comes with it because it's actually stuck to your finger. So tweezers definitely can help you prevent that from happening. Now, one of the other things that you may want to get, I kind of get this just in case, is something called green stuff. It's essentially modeling putty. Now, this might be a little more advanced than you want to go, and that's totally fine. But sometimes, when you put these models together, maybe they don't fit quite right, or maybe you accidentally clip a piece that you didn't intend to clip. Modeling putty can kind of help you fill in the gaps. So I can actually give you an example from this build where I made a pretty big error, specifically with this model right here. So with this model right here, I actually made an error while building, and modeling putty kind of helped me out. So you can see she has sort of like a waving dress, and from the instructions I couldn't quite tell exactly how this dress was supposed to fit onto her body, and in fact I actually put it on incorrectly, which then created a pretty large gap in the back. That was pretty obvious. So I actually used modeling putty right here, as you can see, to sort of fill in that gap. And of course you can see it right now. It's the consistency essentially of a hard plastic, just like the model itself. But when I go to paint it, you shouldn't be able to tell that obviously. So anyways, modeling putty can be helpful if you make kind of errors like that. It might be something that you want to pick up. Just to let you know what it looks like, this is a thing of green stuff right here. You can see it's all wound up and wrapped around. I believe they recommend you store it in a freezer. That's, I don't know, typically where I've put it, and then if I use it, I take it out, let it thaw a little bit. You can see it's blue and yellow, and then you cut off the strip that you want. In this case, I'd cut off just a tiny little piece of it, both the blue and yellow, and then you mash it together until it's a solid green, and then it activates, and then you can work with it, put it where you need, and then after about a few hours or so, it'll be as hard as plastic, essentially. And one of the last things you're probably going to want to get to is an Exacto knife. And of course, you gotta be real careful with this so you're not cutting your thumbs. I do it all the time, so sometimes I even put band-aids on my thumbs just to prevent it from going in when I'm shaving off small, thin layers of plastic on a tiny model. But this is going to let you help clean up the lines, particularly the areas where you clip them from the sprue, the pieces from the sprue, and I really recommend that you kind of shave those areas and get everything off, because if you go to glue those areas and remnants of the sprue are still on the model, they might not secure well to the actual body or whatever it is you're gluing it to. So Exacto knives can be really helpful. They can also clean up mold lines. Sometimes pieces will have remnants of the line in which they were molded, and you can just kind of gently trim that away with a nice sharp Exacto knife. Alright, so that was pretty much my just little update for Kingdom Death Monster. Stay tuned, I'm going to be painting these guys now. I'll show you a picture real quick of how I'm going to paint them. Essentially, it's just the same way that they were showed on their first Kickstarter when they were painted. And in fact, the painter that painted the models for the original Kickstarter has a website in which he illustrates how he actually painted those models. So I purchased all the paints that he recommended, and I'm going to follow his steps, and I'll go ahead and document that as well, and hopefully can get them to turn out as nicely as he was able to get his. So anyways, I'm loving Kingdom Death Monster. I highly recommend you check it out if you're at all interested in this game. It's definitely not necessarily a game for everyone. It does take a lot of work putting these miniatures together. I will say one last thing, and that is, if you have this game and haven't put miniatures together because you're too overwhelmed by how many there are, really all you have to put together first is the lion and 4 of the initial survivors, and you're good to go. In fact, you could play the whole game with just those models, and then the lion would just essentially supplement as all the other monsters, except of course the phoenix, who requires a larger base, but even then you could just throw the base down on the board. I just wanted to mention that in case you're feeling like you have to wait to put all the miniatures together to get your first game in. You really don't. They just, of course, kind of enhance the game by making it look real cool. But anyways, thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the like button, and if you would like to see more Wolfpack Wargaming, please hit the subscribe.